Welcome back to Odd Socks. So I've had a week off. I've been pottering around the allotment a little bit, but I wanted to give a week off from filming just to recuperate from not feeling too great. But I've come into the polytunnel today. Now this is the newer polytunnel, the polytunnel without all those tomatoes. And as you can see, I've actually got an awful lot of chilies in here. Now, if you've seen previous videos, you would have seen me planting up this polytunnel in the first place. I've also got my melons down the one side. Now with these melons I've got emir, sugar baby, cantaloupe, malaga. Now I've grown 3 of these before, the malaga, the emir and the sugar baby last year, and they did do quite well. But I'm hoping this year I get a much better crop. Now if you're anything like us at the moment, the weather is absolutely atrocious at the moment. It's been quite dark, it hasn't been very warm, and in fact the temperatures have been dropping to about 2 degrees on the night time on a regular basis. It's not quite the June I was hoping for. So with that in mind, any crops that I can get this year is an actual bonus, and I'm really hoping, with fingers crossed, that we're going to have a later summer this year. So all these crops will have time to ripen, because that is the problem. When it comes to melons, tomatoes or anything that likes that little bit of warmth, even the squashes, it's all about having a warm enough season for a length of time to get them to ripen. They may grow perfectly well, but if we get an early frost, they'll be wiped out, and those squashes and other fruits and vegetables will not have time to mature and to be able to be eaten off of that plant. So it really has been a mixed year this year. Now, I said this year it was going to be a bit of an experiment with my chilli plants. Now if you again saw previous videos, I'd sowed over 100 chilli plants at the beginning of the year. I think it was February, I could be wrong with that, I think I'll have to double check and pop it up here. Now normally I don't have any issues with my sowings of peppers and chilies, but they germinated incredibly quickly, and in fact they grew incredibly quickly, and they were fruiting before I'd even got them outside. Now I had started removing some of the flowers so they could focus a lot more on their growing instead of producing fruit, but they just wanted to keep on flowering, and the more I kept removing, the more that was coming onto the plant. So in the end I gave up. But what that does mean, I've actually now, before the middle of June, I've actually started to get ripe chili peppers here in my polytunnel. Now, one of the experiments that I was trying to do is to see the difference between planting in a 10-litre pot to planting in the ground, because we grew cayennes and hot peppers in the ground last year and they were fantastic. Now, there is a stark difference. The ones, depending on the variety, they are actually a little bit bigger in the pots than the ground, but I don't think this is actually a very fair comparison. These beds are incredibly new. These are no dig beds that we did early this year, and it wasn't exactly a massive amount of compost on it, and it certainly wasn't some of our best compost either. So as this has been planted into the ground, it's actually got an awful lot of clay soil, which is what these chili plants are sitting in. Now clay soil will hold on to a lot of water, and again we all know how wet the weather's been here in the UK. But it doesn't allow for very good movement of the root system. So some of these are looking good and some of the varieties maybe not so, but they are all starting to fruit. Now I was expecting these, like they did last year, to be up to about here by now. I don't think these plants in the ground are actually going to be getting much taller. They may put on some more growth, and every time I do come into the polytunnel there seems to be a little bit more growth, new leaves on the actual plants themselves. But they'll be focusing now on producing that fruit and trying to get it to ripen. So I don't think it's going to be a fair comparison this year with these beds against the pots. I think once I can get this bed a lot more nutritious with an awful lot more compost, get it a little bit deeper as well, so the roots of these chilli plants are actually in compost more so than the clay ground, I think then it would be a fair comparison. So I think at the end of the year I will be making sure that these beds have got several inches more of compost on top, and again it will be our own compost. Now I've just picked up my list, and this is my list here in case I don't pop it up on the screen. That's all the chili peppers that we've actually now got at the moment, and we're growing. Now there is not 100 plus chili plants in this polytunnel at the moment. I did reduce it and give some away, and then I've got a couple in a few different areas. And we had a lot of pest damage here in our polytunnel and all over the allotment. In fact, I've lost an awful lot of plants here this year. Mainly my newer sowings, they really did take a battering, and we have still got empty beds in June, which in general I've never normally got empty beds in June, but this year that's what I've got to contend with, to try and fill up these with something that the slugs, the snails, the pigeons and anything else that wants to eat it. Now you can see this one is more of my Capia pointed reds. Now this is doing really well, and it is already starting to ripen up, but I actually broke the main stem. Now this one has now taken over, and I do need to pop this with a little cane just to keep it supported, because it's not a good idea for the fruit to be sitting in the soil below. These Capia sweets are all doing really well too, and hopefully I should get some ripe peppers off of this. But it is very, very small. This is my poblano. Now I've got a few of these. I really wanted to get these to dry and mix them down for a spice mix later in the year. And you can see it has been massacred by something. Not sure what, but I can't see no slug trails. But those leaves are very, very munched. But I have got a couple of fruit, and I've still got flowers appearing. And this one's the same. I have got fruit, but it's not as eaten as much, and I really do need to get bean canes on these as well. Now, like I've said, it hasn't been plain sailing, and in fact a lot of the chili peppers have actually fallen off, or they're diseased. Now we've got a lot of chili peppers that have happened like this. Now they've started going mouldy and rotting away, but I'm to expect this to a certain degree because of how wet the weather is, and some of these have probably been splashed with a bit of water as and when I've actually watered them. Now one of the issues is I have been watering with a hose and trying to get to the root system, not on the actual leaves, and with it being quite cold and wet, this kind of thing does happen. So I've started buying trays that I've put underneath the pots to try and bottom water a little bit more. This should help reduce any splashing on the leaves or the fruit, and hopefully it might cut down some of this mould. We do get a lot of pest damage on our chili peppers, and you can see here, you can see the little hole that's in this chili pepper. Once you get a hole in your chili pepper like that, so often you will get rotting on your chili plants or peppers because the bacteria and any damage that's been done on the inside. So it's quite frustrating when you start getting some really good crop, and again that pest damage or water damage, moulds or mildews will get in and destroy those fruits. So just bear that in mind. If you see them, remove them. There is no point trying to grow it. It will just get worse. And if it is a mould or a mildew issue, it will just spread to your other plants and other fruits. So just remove it and discard. Now I'll have to deal with any pest damage once I know what's actually causing it. There's no point trying to treat something if you don't know what you're trying to treat. I'm not going to use chemicals, but there is certain deterrents that you probably could use against certain insects and bugs. But they're doing okay considering how bad our weather has been and how cold this polytunnel has dipped down to. I was really expecting all these chilli plants to have been lost, especially on the several nights of 3 and 4 degrees, and even lower down to 2. But I think I may have got away with it so far, and really once they get to a certain size it really does get harder to actually fleece them up, and I didn't have enough fleece to do it. So if they were going to survive, they would have to do it themselves. So these are all the melons that I've got here in our polytunnel. Now I was going to grow a few in my greenhouse, but I think I'm going to move my Cape gooseberries into the greenhouse instead. Now this one's the Emir, and you can see that I'm going to have it going up the string. I find growing them up a string so they're upright helps with 1, powdery mildew, and 2, keeps the polytunnel a little bit tidier, because once these get going they really do love to spread. So these will grow up the actual strings, and maybe I'll tie some strings to the middle of the actual polytunnel as well, so they'll go up and over. Now being on this side of the polytunnel, they won't shade out anything else on this side, because that direction there is south, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Now these have grown an awful lot. I put them in quite small, and again I'm really surprised with all this really cold temperatures that we've still been getting, and dull days, that these have still done really well. They did get planted with some chicken pellets, I think it was, chicken manure pellets, or some blood, fish and bone, and I think this has really helped, because again this side of the bed as well, it only had probably about 2-3 inches of compost, and as you can see it was quite a dry substrate one. There's a lot of woody debris in this, but hopefully these will carry on growing. And I've only lost 2 melons, which at the moment, with everything else that we've lost outside the polytunnel, that's been great. But again, I'll show you the journey of my melons as they grow, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we will actually get a crop off of these melons this year. Again, considering the really low temperatures that we're having at night, and actually even the daytime temperatures are much lower for this time of year on average. The plus side of the polytunnel growing though, that it can get very warm in here, and every day, even on cooler days, I have got this polytunnel open, either with the top door at the front and the window, or just the door. But either way the temperature's getting up to 50 odd degrees depending on how much of a bright day. Now it's really overcast and cloudy today, and when I've come into here today the actual temperature was 41 degrees, which is very warm. So even at this time of year, these polytunnels do get closed at night because of how cold it's been, but in the day I try and make sure that I've got plenty of airflow coming through. Now this is the tomato polytunnel. Well, when I say tomato, there's a bit of basil in here, and there's a couple of chilli pots down here on the one side, because I'd run out of space in the other polytunnel. But you can see that this is incredibly full. Now our tomatoes this year, surprisingly, have done exceptionally well, and their stems are massive. Now this has been a great benefit to hold the weight of future crops. Now we've got quite a few varieties in here, and some would say it's probably overcrowded, but this is how we grow our tomatoes, and we don't really have any issues. In fact, last year we got a little bit of blight, but it was right at the end of the season, pretty much just before the first frost hit, so it's really not an issue for us here. Now obviously each year is different, and you never know what you're going to get, but with all the flowers and all the new tomatoes that are actually starting to grow on the plants, I'm really hoping for a bumper crop of tomatoes this year. Now we use a lot of tomatoes, not just for fresh eating. We will prep them and keep them and make sauces and all sorts to keep us going throughout the year. So being able to grow as much as what we possibly can really is a benefit. Now we have got a lot of nasturtiums in here and other plants that hopefully will help with their beneficial insects, or to deter the slugs to eat them instead of the tomatoes. But once your tomatoes are this size anyway, slug damage isn't really an issue. We're normally talking slug damage when it's about this big. If a slug gets it to that size, very often that they just don't survive. So I'll do a more in-depth video of all our tomato plants. I thought you would like to see how they're doing up to now. Now they've still got a bit of growing to do, and we normally expect them to get to pretty much the actual roof of this polytunnel. But the one thing that I love growing tomatoes is that you can take a picture every other day and you'll start noticing a difference in how much they grow. It really is, in my eyes, an exciting plant to grow. Again, we use these strings to help support the tomato plants instead of having all those bamboo canes everywhere, because I don't know whether you're like me, I am more likely to poke my eye out on a bamboo cane than to have any issues with these strings. And we use the tomato clips, so we'll hold on to the branch with a tomato clip and thread the string through. This will help them keep upright without too much pressure and without all those beam poles and canes sticking out all over the place. Again, for us it's worked really well. Our strings go underneath the original root ball when we planted our tomatoes, and this will keep it nice and strong to support these tomatoes as they're growing. Now, looking back at previous videos that I did for June, beginning of June last year, I think maybe I should have been further along in the other polytunnel with the growth, but they are still growing and I'm still reasonably happy. Again, it has just not been a good start to the season weather-wise, but they're holding in there, and I'm not too worried about the temperatures at the moment because they do seem to be doing okay. It will slow them down somewhat with their growth and their ripening, but there's nothing I can do, so there is no point stressing about weather, slugs, snails. It's going to happen one way or another. We haven't got control of everything, and I think as gardeners and growers we really do get into a situation where we feel that we have to control everything that goes on in our growing space. But guess what? Nature has its own way. If nature wants to send 1,000,001 slugs to your veg patch, there is only so much that you can do. If nature wants to create bad weather, especially at the beginning, at the start of the season, again, there is nothing that you can do. So just bear that in mind and just go with the flow as much as possible. I always oversow and overplant because nature has a habit of taking some of your crops. So guys, that's it for today. I just thought I'd do a little bit of a tour around our two polytunnels, and I'm really hoping that your growing space, polytunnels and areas, whatever you're growing this year, is doing okay and it's all holding in there. And if it hasn't and it has failed and you've lost majority of your crops, don't forget there is still things that you can still sow at this time of year. And don't forget, do not ever be ashamed to buy in plug plants or small plants to fill in an area. If nature has taken an awful lot away from you, try replanting and re-sowing to see if you can get anything to crop. And again, thank you guys for watching, and I shall see you in the next video.